A very good morning to one and all. An investment in knowledge always pays the best interest. Benjamin Franklin. With this thought in mind, I, Anjana R., Assistant Professor of Law, on behalf of CMR University School of Legal Studies, warmly welcome you all to the day 3 of this enriching academic exploration, discussion, and learning. We are honored to begin today's academic proceedings with a session with our distinguished speaker, Professor Dr. Y.S.R Murthy. Professor Dr. Y.S.R Murthy was the Vice Chancellor of the Assam Royal Global University. Prior to it, he was the founding Vice Chancellor of RV University, Bangalore, besides being the founding Dean, School of Law. As a former civil servant from the 1985 batch of IAS and allied services, he held many responsible and sensitive assignments, including in the National Human Rights Commission, Ministry of Finance, Prime Minister's Office, President's Secretariat, and Cabinet Secretariat. Between 2009 and 2020, Dr. Murthy steered the OP Jindal Global University during its rapid expansion phase as part of its top leadership team as a registrar and a founding faculty member in Jindal Global School. He contributed to its rise in international ranking and becoming an institution of eminence. Professor Murthy has published several books, book chapters, journal articles. He holds a bachelor and master's degree in statistics from the University of Madras, MA degree in human rights from the University of London, and PhD degree from Dr. Tamil Nadu Dr. Ambedkar Law University, Chennai. He secured university first rank in MSc and also the prestigious British Turing Fellowship. Dr. Murthy is the executive committee member of the Indian Society of International Law. He is a national coordinator of SOYAM, besides being the member of Association of British Scholars. In 2019, Dr. Murthy was appointed as the member Haryana State Higher Education Council. He is consulted by the Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy of Administration, Government of Kerala, IGNOU, JNU, Delhi University, and some prominent human rights organizations. Sir, we are truly privileged to have you with us today, sir. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and apologies for this long introduction. I want to thank Dr. Subramanya and the CMR University School of Legal Studies for giving me an opportunity to share my views with the fellow teachers. I really consider it as a great privilege, and I find my former colleague, Dr. Arpita, also joining. Greetings, Dr. Arpita, and greetings to all the teachers. I will like to share some views and perspectives on this topic. And first, I would like to briefly discuss the notion of human rights. Of course, human rights exist in all societies, all religions, and all countries from times immemorial. And in fact, uh, like long centuries of exploitation, tyranny, all of them, I know struggles have led to the contemporary notion of human rights. And in fact, if you look at the contemporary human rights law at the international level, which was, basically came into being after the Second World War, with the adoption of the UN Charter and later on by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And then today we have several binding treaties, more than 70 odd. And then if you look at the non-binding declarations, principles, minimum standards, there are more than 30 such principles. And together, there are 100 odd instruments at the which were adopted by the United Nations General Council and which constitutes international human rights law. And in fact, if you look at these binding treaties, some of them protect the particular categories of rights like civil, political, or economic, social, cultural, or torture, etc., or seek to protect the rights of specific groups of people, including women like SIDA, children, CRC, or migrant workers, rights of persons with disability. So they're all there. And over the years, this a big gap has been felt in regard to the business enterprises and their responsibility for human rights protection. And that's how there was some work which was started in the year 2000. And now, if you traditionally look at the human rights paradigm, there is one, on the one hand, you have a rights bearer, that is the individual, and rights holder. And then there is a duty bearer, that is generally these are held against the state. And but human rights are basically a check against the misuse or abuse of authority. And when you look at the globalization, power is moving increasingly from state to corporate entities. Today, some of these corporate entities, tech giants, their turnover exceeds, some many least developed economies, or many medium developed countries, and some of their net worth is truly mind-boggling. And so is their impact on human rights. And the human rights are basically the rights that one has simply by virtue of being born into the human family, and they are held by everyone regardless of any distinctions, whether somebody is rich or poor, whether somebody is from majority community or minority community, whether male or female, or from regardless of any other distinctions. Everybody is supposed to enjoy all human rights on par with others, and they're equal, they're inalienable, and they're universal, indivisible, interrelated, and interdependent. Um, Having said this, um, let me now take you through a structured PowerPoint, and uh, we have covered this notion of human rights, and in my presentation, I will also try and outline the applicable legal and institutional framework at the international level, and also highlight some challenges on the way, and also share some resources for further research. Uh, Now, let me take up this question as to whether business operations have human rights impacts. Um, this is not a formal face-to-face setting, but uh, we know that they have a disproportionate impact on our life, and it has been growing further. And so, if some of it is adverse impact, and in what ways, in what areas, is a next question. And can you think of some examples? I'm going to share some examples with you, and can you also think of more examples? So you can see the impact of human rights broadly in the areas of, human rights, labor standards or labor rights. It's also International Labor Organization has evolved a host of standards over the years, and about decent work. If you look at the economic, social, cultural rights, there is a clear reference to the right to what you call just conditions of work, right to work, and right to social security, and many other rights. And and then right to clean environment has also been recognized as a cherished human rights, and right to a corruption-free governance is also recognized as a human rights. And so here are some examples. You're all aware of the Bhopal gas tragedy, which was the world's worst industrial disaster, which killed more than 3,000 people, which affected a lot of pregnant women, and the lethal methyl isocyanate. Some of it has also seeped into the soil, and like there have been, more than 3 or 4 decades after, the victims haven't found full justice yet. And so here is a case of, Union Carbide, a multinational corporation, uh, accountability, for grave environmental or the worst disaster in our times. And of course, there are many more such examples you can think of. There are oil spills. There are other disasters that, in the wake of the business operations. Sweatshops in third world countries. Quite often you find garment majors like Levi's, Nike, and others, outsource their operations to the third world countries, and at oftentimes you find people work under in dingy conditions, without toilet breaks, without weekly rest or leisure, without the minimum hours of work in a day, and many other labor rights violations. And that's why ethical trading is important. It's not only the operations of a company, but also the you need to see that the outsourced entities also ensure that all human rights are protected. You've heard of this Plachimada struggle in Kerala. It was about extraction of groundwater, indiscriminate use of groundwater, and how there was a grassroots struggle against the coke factory, coke, and then it was a successful people's movement. And then you have heard of this Niyamgiri movement by Dongriya Kond tribe against Vedanta. For example, there was a bauxite mining, and the government granted mining rights to Vedanta Resources or Vedanta Alumni Limited. And the Dongriya Kond tribe have a deep attachment to their land. They have a spiritual connect. In fact, they worship their land. They have their burial sites. And so this matter went up to the Supreme Court of India, and the Supreme Court held that there should be Gram Sabha held, and the Gram Sabhas involved in that area should collectively decide. And they decided against the mining. And it was a kind of a great success story of a people's movement, and how the connect of the Dogriya Kond tribe to their land, it was their spiritual, it was their traditional habitat, it was their livelihood, it was their more than an emotional connect. It was their many of their spiritual sites were also there. And Ogani tribals operating against Shell. Shell is a major petroleum major in the world, American multinational company, and their extraction of oil resources in Nigeria led to a lot of environmental damage, and it led to the poisoning of clean water resources. And there was Wogani tribals gathered together, and indeed, here is a case where there was a complicity between the ruling regime in Nigeria and the multinational company Shell, and how this complicity, how their collusion led to the suppression, brutal suppression of the Wogani tribals. In fact, there was an activist, environmental activist called Ken Saro-Wiwa. He was executed. As a result, Nigeria was suspended from the Commonwealth, and later on, of course, Ken Saro-Wiwa was given Right to Livelihood Award and many other awards. But here is a case where the operations of a multinational company leading to severe environmental degradation, severe environmental damage, and then affecting the livelihoods, affecting the right to life of people. There are many, many more examples, and I request all the faculty members undergoing this FDP to think of more such examples. And as you unravel, for example, even today, a lot of technology giants collect a lot of our data. There are privacy violations, there are other violations, there are many other violations. Every day they go on. And so it's very important to understand these violations in the backdrop of human rights standards, in the backdrop of their accountability, in the backdrop of the internationally accepted human rights standards. example, I talked about these extractive industries. For example, this uh, in the central India, this Naxalite movement was a result of the acquisition of land by some of the multinational, some of the companies, often in collusion with the governments, and without much proper rehabilitation, without much relief. In fact, when you take land and offer some cash compensation in lieu of it, that too, it's not an adequate compensation. It ought to be a land in lieu of land. It ought to be what you call, if the tribals have made some land cultivable after decades of hard work, and then you settle them in some area where it is not cultivable, and where you don't have access to the markets, access to the temples, access to the other thing, then it's not a proper relief and rehabilitation. And many decades, this mindless development had led to land alienation, despite laws, like alienation from tribal hands to the corporates. And This happened in Chhattisgarh. As a result, you have a Salwa Judum, or there was you need to see, uh, um, there was a women's activist in Chhattisgarh. Uh, Last month, there was an international day for torture victims, which was celebrated in the 26th June. And I happened to listen to the one woman activist, how she tried to resist some of this land acquisition, and how police committed untold brutalities on her. And it was a very heart-rending account. And so connected with this is a loss of traditional habitat, culture, indigenous rights. Um, this facial recognition, mass surveillance, and other recent technologies can also have adverse human rights impacts related to land, labor rights, environmental degradation, and pollution. Now, artificial intelligence has a big impact on climate change as well. The kind of servers they use, they're very heavy on energy usage. AI systems, when procured or deployed without adequate human rights due diligence, in line with the United Nations guiding principle, I'll come to this shortly, can lead to adverse impacts on human rights, including discrimination, privacy violations, and exclusion, particularly for at-risk groups in among women, children, minority, and other groups. Now, let me come to this international legal framework. In fact, I told about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and ICCPR, ICSCR, Racial Discrimination Convention, torture, children, women's, migrant workers, and other core human rights treaties and other treaties which have come around. And in the around 2000, the United Nations recognized that here is a big accountability gap in terms of, businesses have huge impact, yet they are in their operations, in their supply chains, in their relationship with governments or with other stakeholders. They can have a disproportionate impact on the people's human rights. And that's how um, the UN Secretary General announced it in the year 1999, and later on it was launched in the year 2000. And I'll elaborate it further. It was followed by, in 2003, the then UN Secretary General established a special representative and requested him to evolve a framework. And that's how the John Ruggie developed this three-pronged framework of protect, respect, and remedy in the year 2008. And then this framework was further operationalized by the United Nations through the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, which were adopted in the year 2011 by the UN General Assembly. And then it was augmented or supplemented by the principles for responsible contracts, integrating the management of human rights risks into state investor contract negotiation, and the sustainable developmental goals, which were adopted in 2015, and also are quite relevant. And ILO tripartite declaration of principles concerning multinational enterprises and social policy, M&A declaration, which was adopted about 4 decades back, but it was amended from time to time, which involving both the governments and also the workers and the companies, and OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises on responsible business conduct. So these are the some of the applicable international legal standards. If you look at the UN Global Compact, which was adopted in 2000, it was basically derived from UDHR 1940. UDHR, through its 30 articles, give a list of both civil as political as well as economic, social, cultural rights. And the global compact also draws from ILO's Declaration on Fundamental Principles and Rights at Work, 1998, and which was amended in 2022, and also the Rio Declaration on Environment and Development, 1992, and the UN Convention Against Corruption, 2003. So there are a set of 10 principles. Um, the first two principles deal with human rights. Basically, the Global Compact outlines that businesses should support and respect the protection of internationally proclaimed human rights. And it's not just profits or bottom lines, which the companies are generally what you call obsessed with, and profits at any cost, like even cutting corners, even at the cost of occupational health, even at the cost of internationally recognized human rights. That should not be the norm, but instead businesses should support and respect the protection of internationally proclaimed and recognized human rights. And businesses should make sure that they are not complicit in human rights abuses. I've told you about Nigeria, about oil extraction, how Shell forced the Nigerian government and used the Nigerian military to oppress Wagani tribals who are trying to protect their livelihood, their habitat, their environment, and who rose against the environmental damage that was happening. So you find world over there is a crony capitalism. How often there is a complicity between the companies acting in close collusion with oppressive regimes, and together you can imagine what disastrous impact it will have on the people's human rights. So, principle number 3 to 6 of the UN Global Compact relate to labor, and businesses should uphold the freedom of association, which is, of course, a very cardinal principle, and the effective recognition of the right to collective bargaining, and also eliminate all forms of forced and compulsory labor. um, on this point, I want to highlight that though slavery was abolished, though our own constitution has an explicit article in the fundamental rights chapter, despite that there are many contemporary manifestations of slavery or slave-like condition. Uh, so we need to be cognizant as educators, as teachers. We need to be cognizant of the current this thing. In fact, uh, long years back, when India was hosting the Asian Games in Delhi, um, uh, like Swami Agnivesh organization, Bandhu Mukti Morcha, took a case to the Supreme Court of India about the use of labor. In fact, in that case, Asian workers case, the Supreme Court held that If somebody is not getting a minimum wage as per the Minimum Wages Act, it is akin to a forced labor or a bonded labor. Of course, when you look at the our legal situation in India, we have all the laws. We have Bonded Labor System Abolition Act 1976. We have a Minimum Wages Act. We have Interstate Migrant Workmen Act. We have a Workmen Compensation Act. I have personally, while working in the National Human Rights Commission, undertook many field visits, undertook many fact-finding missions. In fact, one such visit was to Vijayawada, where in close to Vijayawada, there were some hills actually, where some contractors were employing labor, and whose job was to go up the hills, plant dynamite, blast the hills, and then break it into stones, and then so it was the mountain after mountain was being cleared in that manner. While in this process, when somebody was trying to climb a mountain, and there is a couple of times somebody has fallen off also, and then those people are not being given proper treatment, and then not given proper compensation, and they were warrior migrant workers working in Andhra Pradesh. And so there are in practical ground reality, there is a huge gap between the position in the law and position in reality. So the Minimum Wages Act, if you look at across India, there are many places where there are violations. So Principle 5 of the Global Compact talks about effective abolition of child labor, and 6 talks about the elimination of discrimination in respect of employment and occupation. Like diversity at workplace, very important. For example, gender diversity, diversity by caste, religion, equal pay for equal work is again a very important principle. Um, like Ensuring decent conditions of work for women, like a workplace without sexual harassment, is also very important. So these are all extremely important principles which are related to the business accountability. Principles number 7, 8, 9 relate to environment, while principle number 10 relates to the corruption. 7 says businesses must support a precautionary approach to environmental challenges. The Supreme Court, in the environmental jurisprudence, have also highlighted this precautionary principle. There is this famous case of oleum gas leak case in Delhi, where Shriram Chemicals and Fertilizers, or DCM factory, was right in Delhi. There was a major chlorine gas leak which affected a lot of people. And so the companies which are engaged in hazardous what you call activities must foresee and take precautions to offset the harms that they cause. And of course, the Supreme Court, in the context of uh, environmental jurisprudence, also laid many other very important principles, including polluter pays, or intergenerational equity, or sustainable development, and so on. So businesses must undertake initiatives to promote greater environmental responsibility. If you look around, you find that many state pollution control bodies are weak in enforcement. Sometimes some of these companies leave out pollutants without proper treatment, leave out affluents into the soil, leave out affluents into the water bodies, lakes, rivers, and cause a great damage, and which affect the human rights of everyone. And so there are many such examples across India, be it by the tanning industries in Vaniambadi, Vellore, or other states. Principle 9 talks about encourage development of environmental friendly technologies. And Principle 10 talks about work against corruption in all its forms, including extortion and bribery. Many decades back, there was a NN Vora committee on the criminal politics and businessman nexus. It's a very interesting report. And this nexus continues, the crony capitalism still continues. Later on, this uh, UN Global Compact work continued on it further, and a three-pronged framework was adopted. That was a protect, respect, and remedy framework suggested by John Ruggie, the UN Secretary General Special Representative. It rests on three complementary and interrelated pillars. The first pillar is the state duty to protect against human rights abuses by third parties, including businesses, by taking appropriate steps. These include legislative steps, these include regulations, these include other steps to prevent, investigate, punish, and redress such abuses through effective policies, legislation, regulation, and adjudication. But when we see in practice, um, very often there is a huge gap in the state duty to protect. We don't have, as of now, a binding legislation um, in India in this regard. And so is the case with many other countries. What we have is a, national action plan in progress, or which is in preparation. But European Union is trying to move towards a binding legislation in their member countries. Yet, if you see across the world, there is no legislation, a full-fledged comprehensive legislation in this regard. It's more or less is a voluntary adherence by companies, and you can at once imagine what will happen to the voluntary compliance by companies. As long as it is not mandatory, as long as it is not the same, it's now left to the whims and fancies of the companies to follow. The second pillar of this three-pronged framework is rests on the corporate responsibility to respect. While this framework was being adopted, there was a lot of debate which went on whether why should state alone have the responsibility to protect. There should be corporate should also have a responsibility to protect, and finally they all the countries have agreed on a what you call a mutually accepted compromise of having a corporate responsibility to respect human rights, which means that companies are expected to avoid infringing on the human rights of others and to address adverse human rights impacts with which they are involved. If you look at many major companies which are working across different countries, they often have their value statements on their website, and which try to uphold human rights. And third major uh, pillar is access to remedy. It requires both states and businesses to ensure that victims of business-related human rights abuses have greater access to effective remedy, both judicial and non-judicial. You look at the International Civil and Political Rights Convention, you will find that it outlines a number of civil and political rights, and also provides right in the beginning in Article 2 access to remedy as a civil and political right. So this access to remedy is extremely important. And later on, this three-pronged framework is operationalized by UN through these guiding principles on businesses and human rights in 2011. Um, as you can see, the title of the instrument, it's a guiding principles. So it comes under what is called soft law, unlike a legally binding convention. This is a more of a voluntary nature. It's a global standard for preventing and addressing the risk of adverse human rights impacts linked to business activity. When you talk about adverse impact, human rights impact, yes, there are many, including on environment, labor standards, and like corruption related, etc. Operationalize the protect, respect, and remedy framework developed by John Reggie. So this one we saw already, state duty to protect human rights. So states must safeguard against human rights abuses by third parties, including businesses. This includes by enacting laws, enforcing regulations, and providing access to justice. Here, a lot more needs to be done. The corporate responsibility to respect human rights. Under that, businesses must avoid infringing on human rights and address adverse impacts they are involved in. Under this, key actions include human rights due diligence, policy commitment, and remediation mechanisms. Under the access to remedy, victims of business-related human rights abuse must have access to effective judicial and non-judicial remedies, and states and businesses share responsibility in enabling these mechanisms. So these UN guiding principles were further supplemented by the UN principles for responsible contracts. They provide a concrete tool to address some of the human rights concerns relating to state investor contracts. These have been developed to enable those parties negotiating state investor contracts to integrate the management of human rights risks into contract negotiations more effectively and to ensure that projects bring benefits to people. Let me outline some of the implementation challenges. We have in India a huge informal economy with nearly 90% in the unorganized sector, which poses a major challenge, and informal labor markets pose a major challenge. And the fragmented enforcement, there are overlapping jurisdictions and weak regulatory oversight hinder consistent implementation. Something is under the Ministry of Corporate Affairs, something under Ministry of Environment, and then there are fragmented enforcement. Supply chain blind spots. There is a limited transparency in labor conditions, especially in sectors like construction. I've highlighted the Workman Compensation Act. I've highlighted the Interstate Migrant Act, or even many other minimum wages act, etc., logistics and pharmaceuticals. Corporate disclosure gaps. Many companies lack robust human rights reporting or grievance mechanisms. Though there is increasingly new work being done on ESGs, etc., there's still a lot more needs to be done. Soft law versus hard law. Most business human rights frameworks are non-binding, creating enforcement challenges. Companies must identify, prevent, and mitigate human rights risks, especially in complex global supply chains. As I said, their major obsession is with bottom lines or profits. And so these human rights are often take a back seat, and then they are not prioritized enough. And victims of corporate abuse often face barriers to justice, as we have seen in Bhopal gas tragedy case, how it took many decades. Even now, we cannot say that despite lapse of nearly 4 decades, that victims have got justice, especially across borders. Here are some resources for further research. There is a Business and Human Rights Resource Center. I encourage all of you to see, which is available online, and this is a link to online Business and Human Rights Resource Center. UNDP has a Business and Human Rights portal. Again, there are several tools which are provided there, and the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has also a separate section on business and human rights. There is a Prill's open access book published in 2024 on business and human rights emerging challenges. As regards the national materials, the National Human Rights Commission and IIM Bangalore study is available on corporate human rights reporting. and there is a zero draft of India's National Action Plan on Business Human Rights. So with this, I stop my presentation, and I am open to any questions and observations or comments.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for this deeply insightful session on business and human rights. We sincerely thank you for your time and this meaningful contribution to this FDP. I would like to extend my gratitude to our Dean, Professor Tia Subramania, Director Dr. Vijay Praneshwaran, participants and faculty members for their continued support and engagement. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Wilson.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure interacting with you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, sir.